What kind of town lets a woman bleed in the street and calls it justice? Ruth entered Sundown with blood in her mouth and a rusted ring on her finger. She had no wagon, no family, and no reason to believe life would ever be kind again. Her thin shawl hung from her shoulders like old skin, and her eyes carried the weight of years that had not yet passed. Folks did not ask her story. They only made one up. They said she brought curses. They said her husband had taken his own life rather than lie beside her. None of it was true, but truth had never mattered in Sundown. The real story was simple. Her husband had drowned in a storm 3 winters before. His body never came home. Ruth had buried the clothes he left behind and walked into the open world with nothing but will and breath in her chest. She was quiet. She was tired. And Sundown was a place that fed on the weak. The town sat between 2 ridges like a scar the land never healed. People there spoke cruelty the way others spoke prayer. The first week, a boy kicked slop water at her skirt. The next, a grocer slapped her for asking for her correct change. Someone smeared dung on the church pew she tried to sit on. No one defended her. No one even looked ashamed. Ruth lived behind the old blacksmith's shop in a lean-to that leaned so far she thought the wind might kill her in her sleep. She worked any job she could find. She peeled potatoes in Harlan's kitchen until her fingers bled. She skinned game for the trapper boy. She scrubbed the upstairs parlor where the women painted their faces and never smiled for free. Each job ended the same way. Bruises, insults, laughter behind her back. The beatings always came slow at first. A shove, a thrown bottle, then fists. Then boots. She never screamed. She never begged. She simply folded into herself like a door closing on a dark room. That was the Ruth the rancher saw on a warm spring afternoon at the cattle auction. Celas Rurk leaned on the railing with a piece of licorice in his teeth. Black hat low, arms crossed, known across 3 counties as the Black Ram. Tall, silent, broad across the shoulders, and rich enough to buy any land he pointed at. Folks feared his temper. No one dared cross him, but he was a widower, and rumor said he carried a pain he never named. He had seen Ruth before, on Main Street, near the feed store, walking alone with her chin tucked low like she expected the sky to fall on her. But he had never seen her hurt the way she was hurt that day. Greeley, the butcher's cousin, shoved her to the ground because she stepped too close to his cart. She hit the dirt hard. Blood ran from her mouth. Hay stuck in her hair. The crowd laughed. Someone spit near her feet. Celas stepped off the railing and walked toward the scene with slow, steady steps. He did not shout. He did not curse. He simply looked at Greeley, then at Ruth. "You done?" he asked. Greeley puffed like a rooster. "She ain't your concern." Celas chewed once, then hit him so hard the man dropped to the dirt without a sound. The whole auction yard froze. He looked at Ruth again and held out his hand. She did not take it, so he crouched beside her, voice low and calm. "This ain't charity. It ain't pity. I need a wife, and I'm tired of looking. Say yes, and you won't be hit again." Her blood ran down her chin. The crowd waited to see her crawl away. Ruth nodded once. They married the next evening under a gray sky. No preacher, no family. Only a paper signed by the sheriff's helper, and a ring slipped onto her finger by hands that shook just a little. The ride to the Rurk ranch was long and cold. When they reached the house, Ruth walked inside and stood still. The rooms were quiet and wide. The air smelled of smoke and leather. There was a locked bedroom door at the end of the hall, and a bowl of cold stew left on the stove. Celas said nothing. He kept his distance. He did not touch her. For the first time in years, she slept without fear. Celas left early each morning. He worked the land from sunup to sundown. He came home covered in dust, but he never raised his voice at her. When she coughed, he brought water. When her hands blistered, he brought gloves. He was a storm of a man outside, but inside the house he moved with a strange kind of care, as if afraid he might break something he did not understand. Ruth cleaned the home with all the strength she had. She scrubbed the floors until her arms shook. She kept her voice small and her steps quiet. She did not trust the peace yet. Peace was fragile. Peace could vanish in a breath. But in town, things were already changing. Men who once mocked her now stepped aside. Women who once hissed insults under their breath turned their eyes away. Celas Rurk's name was a shield stronger than any wall. Those who forgot found themselves gone from the streets for days at a time, nursing bruises they did not explain. Some nights Celas sat on the porch whittling wood. He handed her a tin cup with sweet whiskey, and they sat side by side in silence. But it was a new silence, not heavy, not sharp, a silence that waited for something neither of them knew how to name. And without meaning to, Ruth began to breathe again. She did not know it yet, but her hardest days were not behind her, and her bond with Celas had only just begun to form. Ruth did not know what safety felt like, so at first she mistook it for quiet. She woke each morning expecting a shout, a kick, a blow, but the house stayed calm. Celas left at dawn, returning only when the sky bled orange. He moved like a man carrying sorrow on his back, but he never let that sorrow touch her. Ruth kept waiting for the kindness to turn into cruelty. It never did. By midsummer she began riding the land with him. She asked no permission. She simply saddled the mule and rode beside him. Celas looked surprised the first time, but he said nothing. He taught her how to mend fences, how to judge a storm from the color of the clouds, how to carry a calf too weak to stand. He never praised her. She never asked him to. Their words were few, but they found a way to understand each other through silence. A nod, a glance, a shared cup of water. It was more than she ever had before. Then, one night, a rider came to the ranch. The knock on the door was sharp, cruel. Ruth opened it with the rifle in her hands. The man on the porch wore a crooked hat and smelled of whiskey. His smile was thin and wrong. "Didn't know the Black Ram got himself a new woman," he said. Ruth said nothing. The man leaned closer, eyes traveling across her face. "Tell your husband I came looking. He owes for the last run." He rode away without giving his name. When Celas returned, Ruth told him. He sat down at the table, laced his fingers together, and stared at the wall as if someone had carved a message in it. "He's not wrong," he said. "I owed him once. I don't anymore." Ruth did not ask for details. She had seen enough haunted eyes in her life to recognize when a man's past was still reaching for him. Winter came early that year. Ice covered the cattle troughs, snow buried the pasture, and storms rolled down the ridge like angry ghosts. Ruth and Celas worked side by side, breath white in the frozen air. She held the lantern while he patched the barn roof. He carried water while she salted the last of the meat. When 7 cattle froze overnight, she helped bury them without shedding a tear. She woke one morning to find her hands cracked and bleeding. That night, she found clean bandages wrapped around them, done while she slept. She looked at Celas during breakfast, waiting for him to say something, but he only pushed the coffee toward her and nodded once. One night, the preacher's boy arrived at their door shivering. He brought a letter. In town, a man had begun carving Ruth's name into the chapel door. He said she was a curse. He said the Lord demanded blood to cleanse the land. Celas read the letter and threw it into the fire. The next morning, he saddled his horse. "Ruth," he said, "ride behind me." She climbed up without a word. When they reached sundown, the town went still. Celas walked straight into the chapel and spit on the preacher's pulpit. "This town touches her again," he said, voice echoing like a gunshot. "I'll put it down myself. I don't bluff." No one spoke. No one dared. But cruelty does not die in a day. That night, Ruth opened the door to find a dead rabbit nailed to the wood. She pulled it down quietly and washed the blood away. The next morning, she planted her feet beside Celas as he worked the fence line. She was done hiding. Days later, trouble returned with fire. A blaze rose on the eastern ridge like a second sunrise. Ruth and Celas ran through the smoke, beating at the flames with soaked blankets. When dawn came, the land was blackened, and 4 cattle lay burnt to bone. On a stone near the creek, someone carved a single word she did not repeat. Celas's hands shook. That night, he sharpened the rifle until his fingers bled. Ruth cleaned the blade and wrapped his hands herself. They spoke no words, but fear settled between them like a heavy blanket. The next morning, they rode to town for answers. A drunk man at the saloon laughed when Ruth walked in. Said something vile about the witch and her new husband. Celas broke his jaw without blinking. Sheriff watched from the porch and said nothing. They found the boy who carved the stone. 17. Pale. Shaking. Ruth stepped in front of Celas. "You step on our land again," she said, "and your mother will bury you." The boy ran, sobbing into the dust. After that, the street kept its silence. But danger was not done. A letter arrived nailed to the barn. One name written on it, Jebediah Crane. Celas went white. His breath came slow. "He's not a man," he whispered. "He's a plague. He was my partner once. We burned fields, stole cattle. I walked away. He didn't." Ruth asked one question, "What does he want?" Celas looked at her, with eyes stripped bare. "You." Ruth went to the house, lifted the rifle from the wall and loaded it slow. "He will not have me," she said. What followed was a stretch of waiting filled with fear. They dug ditches, locked the cattle in the high pasture, slept light, boots on, guns close. Then Crane arrived. 5 riders. Dust rising behind them, guns glinting in the sun. They did not attack, only stood close enough to let their shadows fall across the house before riding away. A warning. The next day, Ruth found a dead cow with its tongue cut out. That night, she sat on the porch beside Celas, the rifle resting across her knees. The sky was dark. The wind carried no sound. "You can run," he said quietly. "Take the mule. Go east. Find a place where no one knows your name." Ruth turned her head. "You think I married you to run?" she asked. "I don't walk through doors just to run out of them." The 4th night, the attack came. A bullet shattered the kitchen window. Another tore into the fence post where Ruth had stood moments before. She fired into the dark, dropping one of the horses. Celas took a bullet in the shoulder but stayed standing, firing until the gun clicked empty. Crane disappeared into the night, but not before Ruth's shot ripped through his coat. Dawn brought blood on the gravel, enough for a trail. Celas fell soon after, fever burning him alive. Ruth boiled water, cleaned his wound, and kept vigil by his bed. When he finally slept, she packed food, bullets, and Celas's knife. "You don't know what he is," he whispered. "I know what he's not," she said. "He's not the last man to think he owns me." Before the sun rose, she rode alone toward Carrion Ridge, to end it herself. Ruth rode toward Carrion Ridge with a steady breath and a heart that no longer shook. The land ahead was wild, broken, and quiet in a way that felt almost holy. Folks said the canyon beyond held ghosts. Men who rode into it either came back twisted or never came back at all. Ruth did not fear that. She had already lived through the worst things humans could do. She carried her fear like a scar, not a weakness. The trail grew thinner as the light faded. Broken branches showed where Crane had passed. Dried blood darkened the dirt near a stump. Ruth followed each sign with careful steps. She did not rush. She did not stumble. Every choice was slow and sharp. She had walked years in silence. She could walk a few more days toward danger with her head high. On the 3rd evening, her mule lost a shoe and stumbled. Ruth set the animal free and kept going on foot. Her boots tore in the riverbed and she finished the last mile barefoot, each step burning. She made no sound. She only kept moving. Crane's camp sat deep in a basin of twisted trees and thick smoke. Horses grazed near the water. 4 men lounged by the fire. A 5th stood apart, tall and thin, wrapped in animal skins. Crane. The man whose name had once hollowed out the strongest ranchers. The man who believed fear was strength. Ruth crouched behind a fallen log and watched. She did not shake. She did not doubt. She waited until darkness swallowed the land. When the fire dipped low, she struck. The first man never saw her, one clean cut to the throat. She covered his mouth, eased him into the dirt, and dragged him behind the brush. The second stumbled out of the shadows, and she shot him in the gut. He screamed. She shot him again. The camp erupted. Horses reared. Men shouted. Lanterns swung wild. Crane did not run. He stood by the fire like a man expecting her. "You're not as pretty as they said," he called. Ruth stepped forward, rifle ready. They lied. Crane grinned. His teeth were black. His voice was sharp. "You think this is vengeance? You don't know what vengeance costs." "I know enough," she said. He moved fast. A gunshot tore through her shoulder. Pain burned hot, but she did not fall. She fired back. Missed. Smoke blew between them like a ghost passing through the earth. Crane lunged. She ducked, rolled, slammed her knife into his wrist. He caught her by the hair and drove her face into the dirt. Stars flashed behind her eyes. Blood filled her mouth. He struck again. And again. She bit his thumb hard enough to crack bone. He roared. She twisted her knife upward, right under his ribs. His body froze. His breath hitched. He fell backward into the dust. She knelt beside him, watching the life drain from his eyes. There were no words, no curses, no prayers. She stood up with blood down her arms and smoke swirling around her. She found the last rider hiding near the horses. One shot ended him. Then she burned the camp. Every tent, every map, every saddle. Fire roared against the canyon walls. When it was done, she gathered what she could: water, rope, Crane's revolver, and walked back toward home. The journey back was long. Fever clawed at her. Twice she fainted. Once she woke with a buzzard waiting for her to stop breathing, but she kept going, dragging herself through the brush with teeth clenched and breath shallow. By the time she reached the Rurk ranch, she collapsed in the yard. Dirt covered her skin. Blood stained her shirt. Her hands were locked into fists. Celas carried her inside. He washed her with rainwater, cooled her fever, and sat at her bedside for days. She trembled in her sleep, muttered words that broke his heart to hear. He never left the room. She woke on the fourth morning. "You're home," he said softly. "It's done," she whispered. "I know." She turned her face toward the window. Spring light touched the orchard, blooms opening like small promises. That night they shared the bed again, not as strangers bound by fear, not as souls scarred by others, but as two people who had stood against the world together and lived. When she rose in the morning, she washed the blood from her clothes at the creek and hung them to dry. She sat on the porch with the rifle across her lap and watched the road. No riders came, no threats. Only quiet, but now the quiet felt earned. Months passed, then years. Celas healed slow, Ruth healed slower. But healing came. A girl from town appeared one afternoon. 14, silent, bruises on her arms. She did not say her name. Ruth did not ask. She offered her a bed by the stove and a cloth for her cheek. The girl stayed. She followed Ruth everywhere, learning with her eyes. How to gut a rabbit, how to mend a fence, how to clean a gun. One night, Ruth found her crying softly at the table, striking matches to watch the flame burn and die. "They buried my mama with her eyes open," the girl whispered. Ruth sat across from her. "You want me to go dig her out?" Quote. The girl shook her head. They said no more, but the next morning, she helped Ruth feed the cattle without being asked. Seasons changed. The orchard bloomed. The girl grew tall and strong. Ruth taught her to shoot, then to ride the far pastures alone. By 18, she branded her first calf without shaking. Celas aged beside them. His steps slowed, his hair grayed, but his eyes softened each time he watched Ruth work the land. They never spoke of love. They did not have to. Their life was love in its simplest form, When his time came, Ruth buried him beneath the orchard. Under a stone she carved herself. No name, only the mark of a ram. Years rolled onward. The house stood strong. The land stayed theirs. Trouble never came again, and if it ever did, Ruth and the girl, now a woman, were ready with steady hands and clear eyes. Sundown no longer whispered her name with fear. They whispered it with warning. Ruth Rurk, the widow who survived, the bride who fought back, the woman no one dared to strike again.